everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I am here with author Alice Henderson today. This is the second time that I have had the pleasure of talking with Alice on ADL TV. We spoke about a year ago. Alice is, in addition to being a writer, a wildlife sanctuary monitor, geographic information systems specialist, a bioacoustician. This is a hard one for me. Okay. Bioacoustician. She's surveyed for the presence of grizzlies, wolves, wolverines, jaguars, endangered bats, and more. So Alice, it is so nice to have you back here talking about your books again.
Thank you for having me, Lucy. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, so last time we spoke, there were 2 books out in your Alex Carter series. And now there is this third thrilling addition to the series called A Ghost of Caribou. So I was wondering if you could just start us off with giving a little synopsis of that.
Of course. So I have a copy here.
Oh yeah, I do too. Sorry, I couldn't help.
Uh-huh. Mine backwards. So A Ghost of Caribou, as you mentioned, is the third book in the series. And the series focuses on a wildlife biologist who travels to different remote areas to study endangered species and often gets into some dangerous situations. A Ghost of Caribou is set in Washington State, and a remote camera on a mountainous wildlife sanctuary in Washington State picks up a blurry image of what could be a mountain caribou. And wildlife biologist Alex Carter is called in to investigate. And because mountain caribou went extinct in the contiguous US a few years ago, if one has wandered down from Canada, it's monumental. But when Alex arrives, she quickly learns that her only challenge isn't going to be finding an elusive caribou on this massive piece of land. Loggers and activists are clashing over a swath of old growth forest marked for clear cutting. The murdered body of a forest ranger is found strung up in the town's park, and Alex learns of a backcountry hiker who went missing in the same area the year before. And as she ventures into the forest in search of this endangered animal, she quickly finds herself in a fight for her life. And she's caught between factions, warring for the future of the forest, and a murderer stalking the dense groves of ancient trees. And while it's the third book, it is readable as a standalone.
Yeah, I would say absolutely. I would think the second one as well you could read. But like the other 2, there's a lot packed in there, and you do it so successfully. I love the way that you combine the thrilling action scenes and then all the things that you teach us about caribou and the environment and the clear-cutting old growth forest. But for people who haven't read the book, so these are mountain caribou that you're talking about, and I wondered if you could explain a little bit of the difference between mountain caribou and barren ground caribou, which is what we might be more familiar with, I think.
Of course. So yeah, most people, when they hear caribou, they think of barren ground caribou, which are the ones that roam in those massive herds up in the Arctic and the Yukon and Alaska with like tens of thousands of members in a herd. Mountain caribou are something totally different. They have their own little ecological niche. Their herds are much smaller, generally around 50 or so. And instead of roaming on the vast tundra, they live in these steep mountainous areas. And in the winters, they climb up to these really steep mountainous places, and they use the snowpack there to stand on the snowpack. They have these big shovel-like feet, and they stand on the snowpack to reach tree-hanging lichen, which they can survive on during the winter, which is amazing because other animals can't survive on lichen. It doesn't have enough nutritive value. So they are endangered for a number of reasons. As I mentioned in my book synopsis, our last 2 disappeared in 2019. They were both females, and Canada took them because they weren't going to survive here. And Canada's own southern mountain caribou population is endangered as well. And the 2 that they took from us, they integrated into some herds in British Columbia. So in 2019, we lost our last 2 mountain caribou here in the contiguous US. They were living with the South Selkirk herd, which is on the eastern border of Washington by the Idaho state border. And there was only 2 females left in the herd. So obviously the herd wasn't going to get any bigger. And Canada took them into their own endangered mountain caribou project that they have going on in British Columbia. So the things that are endangering mountain caribou are varied. One is, of course, climate change. As the earth warms, that snowpack they rely on to reach the tall hanging tree lichen is disappearing. And also, another main concern is the clear cutting of old growth forests. So this tree hanging lichen takes decades to grow on these ancient trees. And so as these forests are clear cut, they're losing that lichen that they desperately need during the winter. And also with clear cutting, these younger forests take over. And in these sorts of younger forests, the kind of grazers that like these forests are like moose, elk, deer, and these are the main food sources for wolves. So normally wolves wouldn't be predating on mountain caribou. But with moose, elk, and deer, wolves have a predator-prey relationship. So as the wolves feed on, say, a moose population, the moose population goes down, and then there's less prey. So then the wolf population goes down, and then the moose rebound, and then the wolves rebound, and it's this balancing act. But they don't have this relationship with mountain caribou. So no matter how many caribou the wolves predate on, it doesn't affect the wolf population because their main food source is moose and elk and deer. So also wolves have unprecedented access to these high mountainous areas and deep snow because of logging roads and snowmobile trails and things like that. So they've really taken a toll. And unfortunately, instead of halting clear cutting of old growth, say, or addressing climate change through meaningful legislation, both the US government and the Canadian government instead has decided to cull wolves to try to save the caribou. So they're actually killing thousands of wolves as this last ditch effort to try to save the species instead of doing steps that would actually make a difference.
That's disappointing and also so interesting. One of the things that I really like about this book and your other books is that we learn about the mountain caribou, but we're also being taught so much more about this entire system and this sort of like trickle down effect of if you do this one thing, what's going to happen to everything around it. And all of that is there in your book, but it never feels like you're sitting in this class where you're just getting information and this info dump. It's really worked in well in the way that Alex knows this information and she shares this information. And I imagine you have to do quite a bit of research to have this information be as accurate as it is. Is there anything that you learned during this research that sort of surprised you?
I think the most surprising thing about working on this caribou project is how the Endangered Species Act works. Like, as a little kid, I thought, oh, if an animal gets on the Endangered Species Act and it's listed under that, then it's going to recover. It's going to be okay. But there's so many steps involved. First of all, a species has to be in severe decline to even be considered in the first place. And then this step of considering whether or not to list them also can take years. And then by the time they decide, okay, we'll list, they have to come up with a recovery plan and they have to designate critical habitat, which also takes years. And frequently, US Fish and Wildlife Service blows through these deadlines, doesn't do anything. And so they're repeatedly sued by nonprofits such as the Center for Biological Diversity or the Natural Resources Defense Council. And then finally, they will put together critical habitat, hopefully, and a recovery plan. But in the case of the mountain caribou, the mountain caribou was actually originally listed under the ESA and the Endangered Species Act in 1983, but they never designated critical habitat. And so the US Fish and Wildlife Service was sued in 2002, like 20 years after they first had listed it, to try to, go ahead and set up this critical habitat. In the meantime, there was snowmobile traffic in this very sensitive area, and of course, clear cutting and things like that. But by 2009, after being sued in 2002, they still hadn't done anything. So finally, in 2011, they proposed about 375,000 acres, which was like cool with the conservationists. But in the end, they decided only to designate 30,000, like drastically cutting it down. And then by then, our South Selkirk herd had dwindled to just like a handful of members. And they were getting all this pressure from like snowmobile associations and to just take them off the endangered species list. Like, okay, well, they're doing so bad. What's the point of protecting them? I mean, it's ridiculous. So U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service considered removing protection from them in 2012. And they hemmed and hawed for a long time. And then we were down to the two that I mentioned earlier, and Canada took them. And only then was U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service like, okay, we'll leave them on the endangered species list, even though we don't have any left.
Yeah, at that point.
So it's frustrating. That was one thing that really was an eye opener for me,
Mhm.
doing research for this book. And the same thing has been happening with the Wolverine, which was the subject of my first book. Just delay and delay and delay to look at the science. And meanwhile, like in the case of the Wolverine, we're down to probably less than 300 in the lower 48. But then on some cool notes, on some less depressing notes, caribou are so cool. Like they click when they walk, their tendons click.
Oh, wow.
And their eyes change color throughout the year, depending on the season. So in winter, they have these blue eyes, and the dark color allows them to see better and drink up more light. And then in the summer, their eyes turn this beautiful golden color to reflect back more of the intense summer sunlight. And so that was really neat. And I myself am working on a caribou collar project, like what Alex is doing in the book, although mine is with barren ground caribou. So I'm helping with a study where the porcupine caribou herd, which is up in like Yukon and Alaska, they're fitted with these collar cameras, and they record little 10-second videos like throughout the day. And then I go through these videos and categorize their behavior. Like, do they have a calf? Are they grazing on something? Are they napping or just sitting there ruminating? And it's so neat because you see this glimpse into the world of the caribou. And I mean, sometimes you see these massive herds like just sprawled out all over the tundra, and other times you don't see any other caribou in the shot, which fascinates me considering how large these herds are. Like, did they wander off and on the edge of the herd maybe? And it's so neat to see them interacting with their calves, and the calves can sometimes be playful, and it's so neat. And I love, this is a kind of project I love helping with. My writing income allows me to take on these pro bono projects like this one, which I'm doing just to help out, and I just love it.
Yeah, that's so great. And it's like really interesting how you're kind of combining the two things. Like you have this writing and these projects that you're so passionate about, and then you're able to put that in the book. And I think that like that passion really comes across because that seems to be the way that Alex feels about the animals that she's studying. And we get like a lot of what you were just saying does come across in the book, which is great. The book starts off, the prologue is like right away this kind of mysterious thrilling scene where you don't, it's this suspenseful, it's dark. And so right away you read this and you're like, okay, I'm in for a thriller. This is like where this is going, which is so exciting to just jump into a book like that. And then the next chapter, we're learning about the mountain caribou and why Alex is there and what she's doing. And I wonder, as I'm reading these books, like how do you strike this balance between the thriller and then all the pieces of about the animals that you want to include?
Yeah, I think we mentioned last year that I thought, if I wrote a nonfiction book about these species, that probably the only people that would pick them up would be people that were sort of already on board with their conservation and aware of their plight. So I really wanted to write a suspense novel and then incorporate these facts to, hopefully maybe people that weren't aware of these species or what they're going through would pick the book up for the action and suspense, and then learn about these animals on the side and hopefully be inspired to speak out or take action. So there is that balancing act, because I don't want there's to be so much dry science that it's like ponderous and you're wading through it. So I had to like strike that balance between having lots of action and suspense, and then sprinkle in these cool facts about caribou or polar bears or wolverines. And I love it. I mean, I think because, as I mentioned last year, like action scenes and fight scenes are my favorite thing to write. So hopefully there's a balance between like the adrenaline and the action, and then these interesting facts.
I think there absolutely is, and it's just like a great combination, because as you're saying, it draws in readers who might not otherwise ever learn about these animal populations that you're writing about. And I do remember you saying how you loved writing the action scenes, which I think is amazing, because they're so, I mean, they're so thrilling. Like, that's the only way I can describe it. Like, you really feel like you're there, and they're fast paced, and they're just so descriptive and well done. I'm wondering, what is the most challenging thing for you to write? Because I know you love writing those. Are there pieces of the books that are really kind of a challenge?
I think the hardest part for me, and my editor and I talk about this a lot,
Mhm.
it can be depressing. There's the plight is not, it's not going well. And so I don't want to be really depressing in the book and have readers just say, oh my God, I'm putting this book down. This is too sad. So my editor and I have worked on, how to address this stuff in a hopeful way. So I think that's the hardest part for me, is taking this situation. I feel so passionately about wildlife conservation, but I really want to frame it in this hopeful, we can make a difference way, instead of this doom and gloom narrative I think we're all just inundated with all the time. And so I try to do that. I have an afterword in the back of each book where I talk about um, the situation in a more straight way, and then I have resources where people can learn more and watch documentaries or read other books about the species, and ways that you can volunteer or take action for that species or for climate change. So I'd say that's the most challenging part, is framing that in a way that will make readers read the book and think, okay, yeah, I want to find out more and I want to help.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask, like, is it difficult not to get discouraged when you're doing this, or how do you keep yourself from getting discouraged? I mean, not just with your writing, but in like the work you do outside your writing with all the wildlife research.
I think for me, that I found the key is taking action, because it's easy to just, I think people care deeply about these issues, but they feel so hopeless. They're like moved to inaction. So they just don't know where to start or what to do. And it just seems like this huge problem. So I found that with me, getting involved with projects, and there's so many cool community science projects you can get involved with. I mean, even from your own home, you can go onto your computer and look at remote cameras in Africa and help biologists categorize what they're seeing, and counting hyenas and wild dogs or what have you. And just taking these little steps in your own life, and I think that can really get you out of that mire of inaction where you just feel so hopeless. So I try to take on as many wildlife projects as I can find, and I do a lot of pro bono work, and then I'm writing on the side, and hopefully I feel like I'm doing something, to help.
Yeah, well, and I think that's where the resources that you put in the back of the book are so helpful. For it gives people places to go to learn more, but also ways to help. And if you're a reader and you're like, oh, this, you start to feel discouraged, I think you offer so many different ways than like the citizen science and all that you can do these things that from your own house that will be interesting to you, and not overwhelming, and not impossible to do. So I think that's great that that's in there. And
I
I
have
was
a
gonna
little,
ask,
oh,
yeah,
sorry,
go ahead.
I was
No, go
going to
ahead.
say, I have a little book that I think is really neat for finding projects. I'm going to grab it real quick.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So it's called Citizen
Oh.
Science.
Mhm.
And it has just a ton of really cool projects that you can do. I mean, just in different categories, but you can also go to scistarter.org, which is like
Mhm.
science, like SCI starter.org. And these projects are also listed in there. But that's a great, there's so many neat things in here that I think people flip through and be like, oh, I can do this project and that project.
Yeah, that's really nice to see that. I just wrote that down, so I'm gonna I'm gonna track that one down. But what are you working on now? You were talking about doing the Caribou like earlier, but what kind of projects have you been working on now?
So right now I'm doing a long-term study on the decline of the American pika population here in the Sierra Nevadas and in the
Mhm.
Great Basin. And I've been doing that for years. I've got little temperature loggers stashed around and I see how the temperature's rising. If people aren't familiar, the American pika is a little relative of the rabbit that lives in these high altitude rock slides and talus slopes. And they're great. They're so charismatic and comical. They're very vocal, and they collect all this greenery and they stuff it in their mouths, and then they lay it out in the sun to cure, and they eat that during the winter. They don't hibernate. But unfortunately, as the earth warms, they can't survive for more than 20 minutes at temperatures above 70 degrees. So they're moving higher and higher up these slopes, these mountain slopes, and they get to the top, and there's nowhere higher to go, and the populations just die out. So I have a long-term study going with that. And the other thing I've been looking into is are bats using forests differently during these terrible fires? Like, is the smoke in the air column affecting bat populations? And then, of course, the cool caribou project, which just lights me up every time I click on one of those videos and see the caribou. And then I'm also really getting into wildlife corridor design and figuring out where are core habitats, how can we connect them, does the area cross say like a highway and we should put in a overpass or underpass for wildlife.
That's a lot. Hearing you talk about the pica, that they I think Alex, or no, maybe it's Ben in the book, talks about that. There's a little mention of pica in this Ghost of Caribou, so I like seeing how you're bringing in other interests as well. Um,
I always have the
yes,
picas do a cameo in all my books. I
yeah,
think they're in
I
all
love
three.
it. That's so great. Um, so I want to ask you about Alex Carter, because I think she's such a great character. She's such a strong female protagonist in these books, and I know I said this last time, and I just like that she knows what she wants. She's focused. She doesn't rely on anyone to tell her what to do, and certainly not like on a relationship with a man. I think in a lot of suspense books we've talked about this, but you see, this sort of female character who's waiting to be told what to do or is secondary. So I love that about her. I feel like in this book, um, we started to see a little bit more vulnerability from her, if that makes sense. She um, talks about trying to make human connections and maybe feeling lonely and discouragement with friendships. And so I just wondered like what you see for Alex as far as her personal growth, or how you think she's changed through these three books, and um, will you continue to have her change as well?
Yeah, I think it's tough for Alex because she's working in these remote places, usually by herself. It's hard for her to make and maintain these social connections. So I think she struggles with, she's human, she wants social connection, but her job sort of prevents that in a lot of ways. And because she moves around a lot, she's now gone from Montana to the Canadian Arctic to Washington State, and in the next book, New Mexico. So she might meet people along the way, but they're just sort of transient people that come and go from her life. So I think that's a real challenge for her. That she is lonely, but she has so much heart and she's so dedicated to helping wildlife that she's not going to let that loneliness and that isolation prevent her from what she feels like is her life's passion. And I so agree with you, Lucy, about how women are depicted in these thrillers. It's it's discouraging. You know, I love thrillers, especially with science. And so many times it's like female characters just there to hook up with the male lead
Mhm.
character. And um, it's really discouraging. So I really wanted to create this resourceful, tough, intelligent, someone who could fight and think her way out of different situations, and you know, not be beholden to some relationship that's trying to limit her, or, you know, as you said, tell her what to do next. And
Mhm.
so I feel very passionately about that, and strong women in the wilderness and older women. In fact, Kathleen, I've been fascinated with this real life case for years. In 2006, I was up in the Canadian Rockies, and I learned that this woman was abducted from her. She was in her 70s, and she was a fire tower worker. And every day she'd like boil water and carry it all the way up these stairs to the top of this fire tower. And one morning she just didn't radio in. And coworker went out there and saw signs of foul play, and so the Mounties got involved, and they've never found her or figured out what happened to her. Her name's Stephanie Stewart, and she was abducted just outside of Jasper National Park in the Canadian Rockies. And so I, you know, that was sort of the inspiration with
Mhm.
uh, Kathleen. And, you know, I like, you know, man, I would, you know, was hiking all over, like summiting mountains and hiking the glaciers and stuff with my mom well into her 70s. So I wanted to see like that more represented, because that's very true. Um, that women are very active, you know.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's what I mean. I didn't think about that, like the women of different age too, but I really appreciate that you're working so hard to put that into a book. And Alex also is just like kick ass. I mean, she just, you know, the way she can fight and the way she so intelligently uses her surroundings to do it. I love the way you write that. And I know that you talked about loving to write those scenes. Like, do you have to set up so much of that location ahead of time in your head to know how she's going to use it, or is it just kind of like, are you inspired by the setting already and it just comes out?
Yeah, I set it up to some extent. Like I'll figure out where she is, what she has on hand, and and then I'll know, for example, how injured can she get in
Yeah.
this scene or this fight, and then I'll just let it write. And so a lot of it is a surprise to me, or you know, I'll say, oh, she could use this or that as I'm writing the scene, and I love how it unfolds, because it's both sort of organized and outlined, but not like outlined to death where I'm not inspired to write the piece. Um, so I love that, and I love thinking about what can she tinker with, what can she use to her advantage in this situation. And
Yeah,
I use
it's just really,
the terrain a lot. I like using the terrain.
yeah, that's, I just think that's so neat, and it keeps reminding us of the terrain that she's in, but it's also just such an intelligent way for it, like shows her intelligent, but an intelligent way to propel the scene. And um, I just find it to be really enjoyable to read those scenes and kind of see how she's going to do that and how she's going to get out of them. um, I was
Thank
thinking about, oh yeah, you're
you.
welcome. I was thinking about writing a character like Alex and then having this series and what your readers will expect. Like, I imagine there's got to be this consistency with her, right? Because they've seen her in these books and they're going to let you know if it's like, well, Alex wouldn't do that. But I imagine that you also want to have her. I mean, as we said, she's human and she wants to make connections and she wants to grow. So when you, like when you started these books, I mean, do you have um, an idea of where she's going, or do you have? I mean, you have a sense of who she is, obviously a very deep sense, but like, um, how do you maintain that consistency yet knowing she'll change? I guess is what I'm trying to ask.
I imagine her as being on a journey. I mean, in the start of A Solitude of Wolverines, for example, she had taken a job in Boston to be with her boyfriend, and it really wasn't her scene. You know, she wasn't in the wild. She longed for the wilds. The boyfriend wasn't very supportive at all, um, and so that was sort of the start of her, at least her social journey, her emotional journey, was saying, you know what, this isn't working for me. I don't like this. I'm feel this call to help endangered species. And so she goes out to remote Montana and the relationship was actually already over, but we learn, that it's really, really over in the first book. So then I feel like her journey is, okay, now I've jumped in. She's made this decision that she's going to work in these remote places at the likely expense of at least like a regular traditional romantic relationship, for example, or being around friends all the time, the same friends day in, day out. So as the books progress, she's more and more steeped in this. She's more and more isolated. And so, as you said in the third book, by the third book, she's really realizing, oh my gosh, I am really lonely. I am really isolated. And how can I assuage this while staying true to my mission in life? And so that's how I picture. And I think, with relationships and people, she's got her dad and her best friend from college who are like her buds. I mean, they've got her back. They're great reflection characters she can talk to. But she doesn't have like that everyday companionship for certain. And I don't think a traditional relationship would work for Alex, romantically speaking. Obviously, it didn't in the start of Wolverine. So I think she's going to more and more come to terms with, how do I want to move forward? Does this mean I'm going to be super isolated and lonely, or can I somehow strike a balance here?
Yeah, well, where is she going next? I know you have finished that fourth book, so.
I have. So the next book's called A Prowl of Jaguars, and it takes place in New Mexico. So it'll be, for a change, a really hot, dry, kind of deserty setting. Although it takes place at some higher elevation areas with like ponderosa pine and so on. So in that book, she is tasked with locating jaguars on this vast preserve in New Mexico. And so she's just ecstatic, right? Because jaguars used to roam throughout the Southwest, but now they're critically endangered. I think we have less than 3 now in the US. So she hopes that some of these jaguars will have found their way onto this protected sanctuary. So she sets up the remote cameras and some hair snares, and there's an archaeological team doing a dig on the neighboring parcel of a 16th century conquistador. And so they're digging up some interesting stuff. And she keeps seeing these weird holes that are like dug around on the preserve, and can't figure out who's digging them or why. But then this group of anti-immigrant vigilantes moves in and starts threatening the archaeology team and her. So it deals with issues like, well, obviously jaguar conservation and wildlife being able to cross the border wall. Like, how can we build it in such a way that wildlife can still move back and forth and keep up their genetic diversity and so on. So she ends up in a fight for her life against those that would prevent her from restoring jaguars to their historical habitat.
That sounds, I can't wait to read that. It just sounds like it's going to be exciting and interesting to see her in a warmer climate. And yeah, when do you know when that is coming out?
It is going to be out early 2024. So about this time, probably next year. We don't have a set date yet. And then A Ghost of Caribou will be out in paperback shortly before the Jaguar book is released.
And then, so are you already at work then on the next one after that?
I am. I just started on it.
I can't wait for all of that.
Thank you.
Are there? I know you like writing these thrilling scenes and you write these suspense novels. Are there any writers of thrillers or suspense novels that you particularly love to read?
Definitely, I love James Rollins. Who he's got some standalones that are like full of adventures set all over the world, in Arctic situations and jungles, and then he has a series that incorporates a lot of history. It's a Sigma Force series. I really like those. Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child. I really like their Pendergast series, and then I read a ton of historical mysteries, like I think I mentioned last year, Irina Shapiro. I've like blown through her whole series now, and I just read 2 cool historical mysteries. One was called Murder in Old Bombay. They're by Nev Marsh, and then the second one is called Peril at the Exhibition, and it's set during the Chicago World's Fair in 1890.
Oh wow!
So those are neat. I like them.
Those sound interesting. Um, so is there anything else that I didn't cover that you were dying to get out today?
Oh, I should have
Or
mentioned.
anything else? Yeah.
I should have mentioned Dirk Kussler.
Okay.
He started writing with his dad Clive, and like one of my favorite books by them is Arctic Drift. That's a really cool one. So anything else? I guess I would just say I hope people will, be inspired and want to take action and speak out for wildlife. This is such a vital time right now. It's so hard to get legislation pushed through, as we've seen. The Endangered Species Act has been woefully weakened in the last few years. So, write your representatives, tell them to bring, say, the Pond Fin Act to a vote on the Congress, and also Restoring America's Wildlife Act, which would allow us to build these highway overpasses and underpasses and give funding to state agencies and First Nations to start conservation. Speak out and make your voice heard. And if we can't wait for the government to do something, take action in your community and build up support and ideas in your community of how to improve habitat for local species.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you for writing these great books. I really look forward to reading the next ones. And thank you for taking the time to talk with me today. It was really nice to speak with you again.
My absolute pleasure, Lucy. Thank you so much for having me again.